Welcome, everyone. My name is Neil Thrussell, and I'm really excited to have my friend Joel Young, who is the creator and the custodian of NPA. And I'll even tell you what it stands for. It stands for non-personal awareness. And I'm really excited that Joel's also the host of a podcast called the Brilliant Human Podcast. And he's got nearly 30 years of experience. How is that possible? You don't look that old, Joel.
Moisturizer.
So welcome, and I'm just gonna just jump right in and talk about. What is success to you? And we'll talk about the evolution of success, but how would you define success?
Okay, so I've had some time to think about this. It's one of those interesting things where you kind of, until you do something like this, you don't necessarily stop and think, what is success and what are my thoughts about success and how does that fit into my life? And these days, I suppose where I look at life in general, what I'm about and what I'm up to in the world is about looking at nuances over mechanics. Of course, I looked at it through the lens of nuances. So I tend to think of myself as a contextualist, right? I look at things, there's no truth without context, is one thing I firmly believe. So when you look at success, you have to look at the context. So it occurred to me that we kind of have definitions of success that are on a polar scale. You have to think about it in terms of there are sort of subjective views of success, which are internal, um, your internal perspective about it. Then there's the external, which is what's perceived outside of you as to be success, where you get all of these cultural ideas of success. So you might think, well, then if you go into that polar argument, then do you then favor the subjective or the external? But I think it is more nuanced than that. And I think all of us, I know it's true for me, we're somewhere on the spectrum of that in terms of our balance of what we perceive about success and what success means. So any question you ask about success would have to have a context, because in certain contexts, there's going to be more in the external, and other contexts there's going to be more in the internal. But I suppose if I directly answer your question, because that's a complex answer, but that's how I love the nuances. I suppose if I was to drill it down to one thing, success overall for me is a matter of being truly and honestly connected to yourself, no matter what the choices you make and what you do. So that ties back into that kind of internal or subjective experience, because when you look at it, you're going to have to figure out what truly matters to you. And if you can do that, then you can start having a real conversation about what success means to you with yourself or with others.
Excellent. So my question, so with the younger version, the Joel and finished his high school or the university, was he more concerned with the external vision of success, or what do you think? What was your markers or measurement of success in the much younger version of yourself?
Well, I think I think there's always that kind of, it's like we come in and a sort of certain amount of us is formed in terms of where our set point is. So I think I've always had a bit of a balance, but certainly when I was younger, I know that, well, look, all these guitars on the back of my wall. I teach personal development. I've got like 6, 7 guitars on the back of my wall because when I was 8 years old, I picked a guitar up, and therefore my vision of success was, fame, fortune, rock and roll lifestyle. That was success, which I never got. Well, I got close. I certainly lived the life. That was fun, a bit crazy, but not in that. When I look at it now, success at the time, because it felt like a failure when it fell apart, even though we had great success within a certain genre, it felt like I never made it to that big kind of stadium rock kind of place. So that was a definition of success, or marker I didn't make. Similarly, I think when I got into business, I thought when I had a certain car, that would mean that I made it. Which is not what I think still now, but it was kind of interesting.
Yeah. And so there's these rock. So you were wanted this. We'll use your guitar, and you wanted to fill a stadium. What do you think separated you from this young ideological young man and the people that actually made it? Is there something in there that was the difference that you weren't willing to do, or you didn't get all the right breaks, or whatever? So what do you think separated you from the rock legends?
Well, I think there's a number of things. That's a really good context to talk about it in, actually, in because the music industry, and it's very similar in our industry. You know, they're very similar industries. In the music industry, to a degree, there's an amount of luck. But if I was to pinpoint the place where we missed the moment where we could have gone a lot further, we had an interview with one of the big music papers in the UK, is the NME, and a guy called Steve Lamack, who was on our sort of top youth radio, chatted to us, and he said we had to move to London. He basically said we needed to lick all the right behinds. You know, he gave us a list of the reality of what it took to make it in the music industry in the early 90s. And we were arrogant young punks and said, we're a Windsor band and we're not going to move to London and da 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 da. And so, in a sense, our arrogance, which I think at the time was a cover for other things, meant that we didn't do those things. Now, I can't say that if I'd done those things, it would necessarily have paid off, because in the end, we got to a point where we were nearly signed by a major label. We were about to do a big European tour. And then what often happens is the landscape of the music industry shifted because a band came out and suddenly Sony were like, you know, you're not them and we want them now. It was like really cruel at the time. But I think maybe if we'd done that relationship building thing in the way that we've been told works, then there would be more chance that we could have maybe circumnavigated some of that, because the relationship building, I think, is really important.
So if we take it and move the conversation to a higher level, so you were given some guidance, and so if you had followed maybe per se advice, or had gotten rid of your own version of yourself, and without losing integrity and self-worth, there's do you think that's a key factor in people that are really successful, that they listen to advice, they're willing to take more risks? So the uber successful, how do you think that they get that success?
Well, it's interesting because, again, if we look at it through the sort of eyes of contextual, at that point in our careers, it would be really good for us to have listened to that advice. I think as you go forward, you have to become way more discerning about that dance between listening to advice and listening to your gut feeling. So it becomes, again, my whole thing is like mastery comes from you know, the nuances, not the mechanics. The mechanics is follow the formula. The nuance is play that dance with your own sort of intuitive gut feeling, and then be open to receiving advice and opinions, but take your authority in what you choose to do. So I don't know what worked for people like Oprah and those big people, but I would guess that they have that balance down. Now, in NPA, when I'm teaching mastery to people, because what I do now is I help coaches become like the best coaches. It is that dance. In NPA, we call it animation. You listen for where the energy is already moving. And then, you know, if you can commit to that, like without an agenda, without anything, if you can commit to that, then you're moving with like the universe behind you. So in coaching and facilitating people, that's an amazing skill, because it's magic when you work with someone in that way, rather than just using the mechanics of a tool or a formula. But when you can navigate in that way, then you're in the magic zone. And I think that's where you're going to get success. So I'd say, I suppose, if I put it through an MPA or non-personal awareness perspective, I'd say Oprah was really good at following the animation in each moment, being able to discern the right move at the right time.
And that in itself is a learned and acquired skill. you're never going to get good at it without taking risks.
Absolutely. Well, it's one thing. The first time I ran our practitioner program, which is the mastery, I had a testimonial afterwards, and the lady said, when Joel described that he was going to teach us, she thought, how the hell is he going to teach us that? But she said, I did ultimately succeed. You know, if I look at a success, that's been a huge success from my own personal perspective in terms of the people that have taken it. But it is a skill. I think I had it very naturally in relation to facilitating other people. I had to kind of reverse engineer what I was doing that made people look at me and go, what the hell are you doing? How did you do that? And I had to reverse engineer it so I could actually teach it to other people so they could embody it. Because I don't think it's an exclusive potential in anybody.
So for people that are success, to be the best father, to be a good partner, to be a good business partner, I'm what I'm hearing in there is you're talking about people. What I think I heard you say is people need to be willing to look at themselves and really pull themselves apart and be raw and vulnerable and find out what it is that they're about.
I think that's an absolute asset. I don't know of anybody, or I haven't read anybody or heard anybody that's super successful that doesn't at some point say, I learned and I listened. And it's like, but it is that dance. You've got to learn, you've got to listen, you've got to self-examine, you need to iterate, experiment, you've got to be willing to fail, to succeed, all those things that you hear. But in amongst it, to what makes the difference, in my mind, the difference between mastery and just sort of mid-level success is that nuanced piece of where you can determine the difference between when that learning, because sometimes learning can become, which is a medicine, can become the poison. How many people have you met, Neil, that sort of go to another seminar to learn something else but it's really an avoidance? The last podcast I did on the Be a Brilliant Human podcast was all about that. It was like the medicine becomes the poison because it's actually distraction from taking the next leap, which deep down, it's there. You know what you need to do. It's just there's fears and all sorts in the way.
And I know Tina's listening. Please, Tina, I'm not picking on you, but pay attention to what Jill just said. So I love the word you used, mastery. And I think that's, for me personally, that's the one of the keys is you have to master something. You can't be a generalist in everything in order to be successful at whatever you is that you want to do. Thoughts around that?
So yeah, I mean, mastery is very dear to me. It's like, again, NPA Mastery is the name of the practitioners program. And I think mastery comes with practice over time. You have to do that. But I think also you have to look at the other piece of the equation, which is, I imagine if we pick on Oprah, for example, what she's chosen to become a master of is something that is already innately natural to her anyway. And part of finding out what truly matters to you, that investigation will help you kind of put your eggs in the right basket, so to speak. It's because if you people do sort of reach mastery to a degree in areas that are not their most natural space. It's just a lot harder. And honestly, I think when you've got that innate setup, it's like you're doing the thing you're here to do, then
Yep.
I think there are levels that you can reach of your genius because all you're really doing is getting out of the way to allow them to flourish and express themselves in ways you couldn't possibly imagine when you start out the journey. So again, I come back to, it's very important to find out what truly matters to you. And when I say it truly matters to you, I mean, it's like you can't make that stuff up. It's like, or guess it or secondhand it. You need to really connect with what's real. And when I say connect with yourself, I'm not either talking about that spiritual idea of self where it's like the God, the boundless in you. I'm
Yep.
talking about getting granular and real about your humanity, including your spiritual self, but including that part that wants to have a nice Jag car or something. It's like you've got to put them all together and go, in in the smorgasbord of differences that make up me, what does that add up to in what actually matters to me? And it's not going to be a black and white answer. It's going to be a collection of things you sift through and go, these things truly matter.
Absolutely. And here,
Success is working towards mastery and using your natural gifts and talents. I think it's a massive asset. That's Tina, isn't it? It's a massive
yep,
asset. I wouldn't. I'm not someone who'd say that was an absolute barrier. I just said, it's
yep,
it's going to be it's going to be hard to do it otherwise.
yeah. So, and I love the talk that you talked about mastery and looking at your talents, because we I'm when I define the trouble with being normal is that when we follow the societal norms, that you white picket fence to, and then nothing wrong with it, but in order, if you want to be successful in whatever it is that you're choosing, I think you have to take the risk and step outside of what everyone else is doing, and take a risk, take a chance to be something different than what society wants of you.
Yeah, it depends. Again, context here. I'm a bit pedantic on the context, but I think when you say there's nothing wrong with it, I think that's pointing to what I would say, which is like, so that stepping out of the box, that difference that often gets us people in society that we hold up as great, the Elon Musks of the world, the Oprahs, all of those people. They want that. That's important to them in some way. There are, and in order for them to be contrastingly different, there needs to be a body of people for whom that is not their thing. Success for someone may be, for example, raising a family, having a steady job, and keeping their head down. Now we can argue from a sort of personal growth perspective that, well, they don't really want to grow, but in who do we know? What do we know what their soul's up to in this lifetime? What do we know about that? It's like, and without people who have that, we don't get, our Deliveroo to us. We don't get our, the shirts made. We don't get those things that take someone who's gonna, what matters to them most, and if they honor it, are going to go and do the 9 to 5 job and do what they're told. So I really kind of unpack it and say, that's why it comes back to the nuances of that actually for many people is what truly matters. The difference there is, if you're doing that but it's not really you, then you're going to suffer. Similarly, if you think you're supposed to be breaking the boundaries and doing the rest, and you think that's what you're supposed to do because you were raised in an entrepreneurial family, but actually you just want to get a job, then you're going to suffer because you're trying to be Oprah when you're not. It's just not you. That's not actually what matters, and that's a different task of dropping that agenda, that idea, and coming back. I just want to be a farmer. It's like, and then go do it.
Absolutely. And maybe that's a definition of success, is doing what you love.
Yeah, I think so. I call it doing what matters, only because again, I love to sort of play with words. Doing what you love has become kind of a potential cop out, for example. What
Yep.
matters to me has more gravitas. Mostly, you're going to love what matters to you, but sometimes what matters to you is going to be hard, and you're going to not love it at all. So, but if you're honest, and if it matters to you, then it's worth. It helps get you or motivate you through the challenges which you're going to meet if you want to, especially if you want to push out the box. You're going to meet those challenges.
I can't believe we're at 20 minutes already. So, is there anything that a very quick something that you would love to leave our viewers and listeners with?
I think just to examine yourself and what you. I guess it's that phrase, which is ask yourself what truly matters to you. I invite them to come and check out my website, which is the npaacademy.com. If they're interested in mastery, and anyone who's here listening as a coach wants to come and check out NPA Mastery, it'll be there on the site. and come check it out. But I think that's my message from today is be really honest with yourself. What truly matters to you.
And thank you for joining us, Joel.
My absolute pleasure, Neil. I'm looking forward to the rest of this program, this experiment that you're running. Fantastic.
Thank you.